My chakra, the amethyst has fallen off my meridian.
It's a new year, dear long-suffering listeners, and we have something a little different for this episode in the form of an interview. I first met Kate McMahon in an undergraduate philosophy class, where the thoughtful articulacy you're about to hear terrified those of us who relied on reckless bloviating. Kate is a singer, songwriter, and multi-instrumentalist whose walls are hung with her own paintings. Her range of abilities is frankly disgusting. Her good nature and wit, on top of all of that, is utterly unforgivable. Kate is now a practicing music therapist and took the time to introduce me to her craft.
So I like to sometimes explain it in terms of if you know what an occupational therapist is and how flexible they are and how many different settings they can work in the community or in hospitals. A music therapist can work in all of those same settings, and rather than using equipment, and devices, they'll use music. When we listen to music with a really strong beat, our heart rate will sync up.
The first thing to say is that we're speaking with Kate McMahon.
Hi.
Who is, I could give something of a bio, but not a very good one. Who are you, Kate, is a simple question to begin with.
Well, excitingly, right now I get to say that I'm a registered music therapist, which is something that I've been looking forward to for many years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I came to being a music therapist through a very complex educational path of a Bachelor of Arts with dear friend Misha, studying music and then always being interested in psychology, trying to get in several years ago to the course at Melbourne Uni, which is quite competitive, not getting in, having my heart broken, nearly giving up, studying social work, and then backflipping right back into music therapy halfway through the social work.
So the music therapy was the one that was incredibly difficult to get into, or
Yeah.
psychology? Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I was interested in psychology when I was younger, but that was before I heard about music therapy, which seemed to combine my interest in science and the human mind and also music, which is a personal passion of mine, but also just so incredibly complex and specialised that, that's right up my alley.
Yeah. No, it really is. And that's where I would be starting, I suppose, as far as this conversation goes, is I think everyone can tell you what music is, more or less,
totally.
or recognise it when they hear it. And I think everyone, at least colloquially, has an idea of what something therapeutic is. But the combination, I have to say, is something that strikes me as completely mysterious as of now. Do you have like a sort of, this is my introductory idea for the ignorant like myself?
I totally do, because it is actually a really new profession. New as in it's been around probably since the 70s as a profession. It's been around forever as a concept, but it's just like a lot of professions, it's just been formalised and understood in the literature only fairly recently. And, also because we can all identify with feeling that music is therapeutic for us personally, there is that, I kind of get what it means. So, yes, music personally is therapeutic for so many of us, which is, what drew me to it, and it's, what draws people to be interested in it. But as a profession, my spiel, here it comes, is it's an allied health profession where music is the tool that we use to support people in a clinical setting, to support people's physical health, their mental health, or their psychosocial health, and even, depending on the context, their spiritual health. So I like to sometimes explain it in terms of if you know what an occupational therapist is and how flexible they are and how many different settings they can work in the community or in hospitals, a music therapist can work in all of those same settings, and rather than using equipment, and devices, they'll use music. Yeah.
And is that using music as the client, as it were, is in a passive state, as in listening to music, or do you use music in the active sense, as in you bring in some gear sometimes and get people actually making music?
Absolutely both.
Both.
Yeah. And in fact, as part of my training, they're quite explicit about the receptive methods of music therapy and the active methods of music therapy. But I should say, actually, a really important part of music therapy being therapy is that it's a relational thing. So a lot of the healing, particularly in the psychosocial, emotional domain, is done through that therapeutic relationship, which music supports. And, music sometimes is seen as almost a third person in the relationship, or as a vehicle for expression of emotions. Yeah, it's like an empathetic vehicle, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the populations that you're working with at the moment are relatively specific, aren't they?
Yes and no. I mean, I think my training is an eclectic model of music therapy, which kind of prepares us to work with everything from children with autism to clinical hospital settings to private practice psychotherapy, although you probably want to be doing some more psychotherapy training if you're going to go into private practice. But yeah, I mean, at the moment I've been doing a lot of work in psychogeriatrics, which is older adults who have either dementia with some sort of behavioural and psychological symptoms, or older adults who've had chronic mental health conditions who are now just old.
Yeah.
So that's people with schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder and things like that. Yeah.
And another thing that immediately strikes me is obviously as people age, depression rates skyrocket.
Exactly.
Other like baseline anxieties skyrocket.
Absolutely.
Impending death is
Yeah.
very much on people's minds. Like those things
Yeah.
have huge impact.
Yeah, and music therapy, is really, it's one of, I've also done work in palliative care, and I found that music was one of the few spaces where you can really safely explore some of those existential kind of fears that we all have, and come to some kind of sense of peace within those fears, and also connecting with family members in those really scary, confusing moments. Sometimes a shared musical experience can really make people feel like, even just for a moment, like they know what's going on and it's okay. Yeah. So it's really beautiful, actually. Yeah.
It's so interesting, like especially the palliative care thing that you bring up. Like, I've got so many questions going in so many different directions. But that is like you're working in some really tough areas.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah.
Because in a really, really small way at the moment, hopefully in bigger ways in the future, I work with populations who are dealing with some shit as well. But that's definitely like my biggest curiosity for anyone in a clinical setting like that is like, how are you going yourself? How do you find that?
Yeah, well, in any of those professions, self-care is really important, and supervision is really important. I have to say, for me personally, I find that there is an aspect of self-care built into the music because
that's interesting.
Because music is such a healing modality. For me, I'm also processing my emotions as I'm supporting others to process theirs, and I'm expressing it in a physical way that's meaningful to me personally. So there is an aspect of that. Also, supervision and processing is just really important, and making sure that I still, I do a lot of journaling.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of music making just for my own benefit, and I'm really aware of how I can use music to help process my own emotions.
Yeah.
And interestingly, this is something I should touch on at some point, is how not to use music to process emotions, because
Ooh.
sometimes...
I mean, I'm fascinated.
Well,
Right
you
away,
know...
please.
Well, you know, we love to think about music as something that's positive always, you know, and it can, you know, it always makes us feel good. But I think, you know, you probably had experiences where you found that that's not true. And there's research that's explored that aspect, particularly in people with depression who use music in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
To support rumination, and it can really exaggerate that, and it can, you know, really, I guess, it's almost like an enhancement drug. So, you know, if it's making you feel bad and your tendency is to really wallow in that and go with that emotion, and you don't have the tools to get it out, then music can just keep pushing you there stronger and stronger, you know. It's really, it can be dangerous. So there's healthy and unhealthy uses of music, and that's actually something that's being kind of used with young populations at the moment. Music therapists are really keen on teaching young people how to recognise, you know, how does the music actually serve you right now, being aware of, you know, okay, after listening to that piece of music, like, do you feel better? Do you feel worse? In what way? You know, how might you use it differently to actually get the results that you're after? If you were meaning to feel better afterwards and you don't, you know, have a think about that.
That's such a fascinating thing. Just as you were saying that, I have a really vivid memory of a very particular experience I must have been in about year 11, and I must have been listening to Rage Against the Machine.
Yeah.
And it might even have been like one of their live albums, Battle of Los Angeles, maybe.
Yeah.
And I do remember, like, back in the day, having that sort of bootleg on a tape, on a Walkman, walking to school, and about 2 tracks and coming into school and just realising I'm really angry.
Yeah.
Like, I feel really enraged at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, the emotional valence of that particular music is very much that.
Yeah.
It's not only the sort of emotional content, but there's a kind of political rage.
Totally.
Lyrically
Yeah.
as well.
And that's not to say that feeling angry is wrong, because, you know, that's a legitimate emotion, you know, responding to some legitimate circumstances, no doubt. So I think that's where that therapeutic relationship comes in. Like, who do you talk to about that? How do you use that emotion to help you resolve whatever it is that's going on? If you do that in isolation and you do it again and again, then you might have some negative outcomes. But, you know, if you have the tools to kind of recognise what's going on and go, well, you know, how am I going to channel that positively or for what I want? Then that's kind of where a music therapist might come in.
Yeah.
Or just, you know, like self-awareness and then talking to a friend or family or something.
So you, like, let's just come back to that. Say you had encountered the 17-year-old Misha who's just listened to 3 tracks of Rage Against the Machine in a row.
Yeah.
Were that to be in a musical therapy context, you then jump in with a kind of talking therapy around that?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, I didn't quite answer your question before about those receptive and active methods, and I guess this might be a good place to explore an example of that. So it also depends on if it's an individual or a group setting, because quite often, you know, with young people you'll be working in a group setting, and older people as well. It just really depends on the funding model and all sorts of things.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, so groups with young people are huge and also, you know, really important, because at that age, as with every other age, you're learning about where you belong socially, and, you know, you are who you are in context of others. So if somebody, say, shared one of those songs in a group, then I might facilitate a conversation in the group about, you know, other people's responses and reactions. So then that person might get a sense of, you know, is my feeling around this music specific to me, or is this a broader emotion that's being felt by the group? And if so, what is that about? Are we having a shared frustration? You know, and if there is some sort of frustration about, you know, these sort of terrifying circumstances that we find ourselves in sometimes, you know, collectively, then I think that's where you might actually use some more active music therapy to try and channel that and process that and share that in a more positive way. So that could be like a drumming circle or a jam session, which then, you know, harnesses those emotions and channels them, but in a social way. So you're feeling bolstered and supported in those emotions. You're not alone. And I think it's such a powerful way to connect. You know, you're physically in sync with others. You're learning to listen to others, you know, you're learning to cooperate, you're learning to stand out, you know, when to push, when to pull back. You know, there's some really valuable social lessons in that. And that could be a way that as a music therapist I might address, you know, that very starting point of someone feeling angry from listening to Rage Against the Machine. Yeah.
And I do, like, I really do remember that as an unpleasant realization.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't feel like a constructive anger. It didn't feel like, it didn't feel cathartic. It didn't feel like anything was getting off my chest.
Yeah.
It just felt like I am channeling the raw emotions that are coming through this very aggressive music.
Yeah.
And there's a funny... I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this, but I also remember, like, I remember seeing an interview with Henry Rollins once, who is like a remarkably articulate voice for what sort of a certain kind of punk music is all about.
Yeah.
And something he said once has puzzled me for a long time. He was talking about how he's got this really odd combination of, like, he's rather an old fogey about contemporary music, and yet really, really invested in a kind of punk ethos. So he sounds like an old guy who's saying, oh, the music that these kids listen to is shit.
Yeah.
But he's doing it in this really curious way. And he talked about the music that had the most powerful impact on him as a kid. And he was always saying, it made me want to break stuff. And that was his concept of, like, this is a sign of good music.
Yeah.
Which is a really odd, like, that's, the more I think about that, the odder and more maladaptive that seems.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that just doesn't strike me as being a positive impulse.
No, I mean, you know, and I'd be, you know, I'm careful to not, I guess, judge impulses, you know, too much, because I think they always have an underlying cause, I suppose. And, you know, who knows, maybe we'll find that that's adaptive for some reason. But, you know, I think, it comes back to if he enjoys that feeling or if he doesn't enjoy that feeling, and how is it playing out in the rest of his life.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe it made him want to, you know, break stuff, and then he did it in the backyard in a, you know, constructive way, like took up boxing or something, and then managed to move on. Who knows? But yeah, I think it's about what you do with these emotions. But that's right, if the music is kind of stimulating that and then it's got nowhere to go, I think that's when you get some real problems.
Yeah.
Or if it's driving you deeper into a dark place that you can't get out of, then yeah.
How much of your practice as a, like, practicing as within a therapeutic environment, are you having to figure things out on the fly? And how much of it is, I'm going into this session or this group with quite a specific plan? Because when you say things like, for example, again, say it was someone who's having X reaction to some quite aggressive, angry music, and you're then going to attempt to channel that, particularly for a group. Are you having to kind of think on your feet, as it were, or is there some sort of toolbox that you've prepared for yourself?
I always go in with a plan, but I also have, as part of that plan, the, you know, complete ability to throw the plan away at any time. I think, you know, and that's any practitioner, you know, if you're not thinking about the population that you're working with, you know, the people that you're working with, then really, you know, you're going in blind. And, you know, whilst there's definitely something for taking people as they are and where they're at, in clinical settings, there's often information that you really need to know. And, I think having a big part of your role as the music therapist in a group setting is to be containing. So if you're completely winging it all the time, it's not going to feel safe for the others. So, I think having a plan but being willing to throw it away and ready to throw it away is pretty much every day for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So what's I'm just trying to think. Actually, I might just jump on this question. When I started working at a publicly funded rehab, which I never name because I never asked anyone there if it's okay for me to do a podcast, and I don't want to be told that I can't. But
Yeah.
I started off working in a private rehab,
Yeah.
which tend to be quite narrow in terms of their clinical focus. They use a very safe set of techniques, and they're delivering something quite specific, which generally they have to be quite upfront about because there are substantial costs involved for people. In the publicly funded area, my experience so far has been that they're far more open to complementary, or I think allied therapies was that the phrase you
Allied
used?
health.
Allied health, yeah. And I must confess, when I began working there, I had an uncharitable attitude towards complementary therapies there. And one of the huge eye-openers for me has been not just the sincerity and commitment of those staff, but the really obvious utility of what they do.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if you've felt from other practitioners in other areas negative sort of valence about what you do. Like, what's the standard kind of attitude for another clinician within a setting that you're working in?
There seem to be two kind of common reactions, and then there's a third, which is really, really small, which is those who've encountered music therapists before.
Yeah.
But because music therapy is still kind of establishing itself within clinical settings, most people that I come across have not heard or encountered music therapy. So there's one camp that are very excited because they love music and they know that they're like, oh, the oldies love it, or something like that, or the kids love it, which is lovely and true, but not quite the full story.
Not a particularly sophisticated understanding of what you do.
And then there are the others which are like, well, just don't get in my way.
Yeah.
Like, I don't quite understand why you're here. I have a job to do. Please don't get in my way.
Yeah.
And I find that the best way for people to kind of shift from that is to see it. And so I think with music therapy, we have a kind of a mission to show and not tell, because I think, when people see it, and then you have a chat with them afterwards about maybe what your clinical goals were and, how they've been achieved or are in the process of being achieved, then you can start to have a bit more of a sophisticated dialogue about what's going on. Yeah, also sometimes working with other health professionals. Like I did a placement in the Royal Children's Hospital. A lot of the time I'd be working to support procedures, and that might be the changing of wound dressing, that might be, needles and, all sorts of uncomfortable things.
Yeah.
And so working with the nurses to help support the child within that moment, I think that was really where the nurses were like, oh, I get it. Like,
Yeah.
Because, then they're seeing like that you're a skilled physician yourself, that you're adapting to the child. And that's a lot of music therapy is about using live music. So you'll be singing or playing guitar or using percussion, and that's so that you can be adaptive, and I think, for example, supporting one little girl who was having, some quite uncomfortable head wound dressing being changed, and her attention is being pulled constantly to the discomfort. And so my job was to be redirecting her attention to something and really keeping her cognitively engaged in what we were doing. So we would be doing a counting song. And, as we're going maybe it's like about the little ducks and we're jumping them all over the table in front of her, and we're being creative and having a joyful time. And she's just sort of, there's something happening in the background then for her.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that. And then the nurses see that. And, you know, also as I'm playing, I'm standing up and kind of, you know, making myself really small so that they can squeeze behind me and, you know, passing them a swab and, you know, as I'm playing and singing. And they're seeing that adaptability and they're understanding what's going on.
Yeah. Which is, like, and there I guess it's like you're demonstrating such an asset to that clinical moment, which is their kind of everyday. Like, this can be either a wrestling match with a screaming background or there can be ducks involved.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, that has such a flow-on effect too, you know, for children that come to the Royal Children's, you know, they often have ongoing issues that mean that they need to come back again and again. And if their experience of being in hospital is negative, that's going to be a struggle for everybody every time. Yeah. Whereas if you can build up their positive experiences and give them a feeling of empowerment within that setting and, you know, of safety and of joy even, you know, they might actually remember those positive aspects rather than the negative ones, and it'll just make everyone's experience better, you know, and potentially reduce, you know, PTSD for that child in the future. And,
and make them more willing to, just for the remainder of their life, be willing to seek any kind of medical help, which is not something that, it's something that everyone can probably be better at.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's something that I find now when I go for blood tests, whenever I have a blood test, I just think of those kids and I'm like, oh, I know what I can do to make this a better experience for me. I'm just going to picture like little ducks dancing on the wall. So, you know, as an adult, those same techniques apply.
Yeah. One of the things that, because again, like I knew that I couldn't do justice to this area by sort of researching it from scratch or trying to read about it from scratch in terms of trying to prepare for this conversation. But one of the things I was thinking back to is to the extent that, like, you know, I had piano lessons for years when I was a kid. I still noodle around in music in a very undisciplined sort of way, but I value it really highly. Yeah. But the thing that I was thinking about is music has so many attendant kind of aspects and skills involved in it. There's definitely a sort of cognitive element and a mathematical element. There's the physicality that's involved in producing it. There's the physiological response that we get from listening to it. Yeah. And there's the potential, to the extent that it has lyrics involved. There's that either poetic or just, again, cognitive in terms of the sort of semantic aspects of it. Do you get the sense that, like, all of that together is just a net benefit, or are there bits of that you might be trying to kind of say, okay, that's what I'm aiming for with this particular person?
A and B.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say, as a practitioner, you're generally very conscious of the mechanisms that are involved in whatever you're working with. So there's a lot of music therapy in rehab. In physical rehabilitation as well as drug and alcohol rehabilitation. But I am talking about physical and speech rehabilitation, where, you know, the understanding of the way that music supports the development of neural pathways and, you know, the general kind of functioning of the brain is something that we're fully taking advantage of for that. And then seeing all of the other, you know, psycho-emotional benefits as a bonus. Yeah, so I think we really, that's kind of what sets a music therapist apart from, say, a musician who goes and volunteers in a hospital, is that we do have that knowledge of the brain and the body and how music interacts with it at all of these levels. And then we go in there with a plan on how to use music. That's why I say we use music as a tool, is because we go, all right, what's our focus here? Is it to help someone, you know, regain speech? Okay, well, you know, so we're going to use neurologic music therapy techniques because, you know, we're talking about, I guess, practicing those neural pathways or accessing and building other neural pathways that we know are complementary and can support the, regaining of speech in that situation. Yeah, so that is kind of what being a music therapist is about kind of knowing that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is super complicated.
It's
like
so
that's
complicated.
Legitimately complicated.
It's really legitimately complicated, and that's why, a lot of music therapists will specialise and tend to work in certain populations in certain areas, and you're just constantly, training in new techniques, and so you'll find that some people do specialise in more of the physical rehabilitation, but that we all kind of have a general understanding of what's possible. Yeah.
Is there for someone who's interested in this area, is there like a gateway book that might introduce people to some of these ideas? I was trying to think, the closest I could come up with was maybe, as I'm listening to you, something like Musicophilia by Oliver Sacks.
Yeah.
Which is not directly about music therapy, but which does contain an astonishing array of insights about just how critical music can be to mental, physical health.
Yeah. I would say that is the perfect example, actually. And that is how I found out about music therapy in the first place. Yeah, my mum gave it to me as a gift,
Wowzers.
years ago.
Yeah,
and I was just like, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was what really sparked my interest in music therapy. So yes, get onto it, Musicophilia, Oliver Sacks.
Or anything else that he's written, by the way. They're just endlessly fascinating.
It's true. Yeah, he's a great writer.
He combines this is going to sound awful, but he combines all of the best kind of voyeuristic freak show pleasures of what can go wrong with the brain.
That's a really good way of putting it.
and also just this bottomless compassion and astonishing capacity, I think, to teach you or give you some insight into that compassion.
Absolutely.
So you can get this tremendous enjoyment out of the person who tries to put his wife on like a hat when trying to leave a room, and at the same time get an insight into how profoundly sad and worrying that is also.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And he does actually detail some quite specific music therapy techniques. I seem to remember that he speaks about the use of the Argentinian tango to support people with Parkinson's. And so basically, with Parkinson's, there's a lot of unsteady gait and uneven gait. So, people aren't, when they're walking, there's not a smoothness to that. And so by using the Argentinian tango, which is a dance, but then it has specific music that's very rhythmic, very clear, and also I think importantly relatable for that group of people that he was working with, which is another aspect I should probably mention, is that our responses to music are ridiculously idiosyncratic. There ain't no song that will do it for everybody. It's all to do with your personal experiences of that song and your memories and just who you are. But so using the Argentinian tango, it's got this really strong pulse. He didn't really mention if the music was live or not. Within those settings, you often would have it live so that you can adjust the tempo to suit the abilities of the people that you're working with. And you can really emphasize that beat that you want people to be responding to. But by keeping a regular and clear beat, we do have a physiological response, and we actually physiologically entrain to the rhythm. So when we listen to music with a really strong beat, our heart rate will sync up with that, our breathing will sync up with that, and our motor movements will start to anticipate the beat, and that is what helps with gait, with the smoothness of your steps. So by using that with people with Parkinson's, they all of a sudden find, my body knows what to do. My motor pathways are primed to move now and now and now and now, and they don't have to think about it anymore, and they just find this sense of freedom, and it's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah, so Oliver Sacks talks about that in one of the chapters of his books in a much more articulate way.
That was pretty good and also moving.
Oh.
So not so bad yourself, Kate.
Oh, thanks.
Don't go selling yourself short. So you must have to be, I would imagine it would, how to say this? I would imagine it would help a lot to have like a ludicrously eclectic musical taste yourself, so as not to be driven wild by the kind of really specific needs of one particular population.
This is true. I compartmentalize, shall I say?
Yeah.
Where
You did mention, because this is something that I did want to ask you, because I asked your opinion about quite a specific musician, and your response was that you no longer really have taste of your own.
Yeah, well, within music therapy, I don't.
Yeah.
Because I can appreciate it all for what it does for those people.
Yeah.
And, I guess what I'm listening for, rather than my own personal aesthetic pleasure, is the elements of the music.
Yeah.
So what is it about the tempo? What is it about the timbre? What is it about that guitar that, makes that person like it? So I'm really trying to step into their shoes about why they like it. And, that's kind of infectious. Like if somebody loves something, it's infectious. So I can get on board. I'm all about Taylor Swift.
What might ordinarily be an embarrassing revelation becomes something quite sweet.
Totally, that's right. Well, and personally I'm not all about Taylor Swift, but within those contexts, I get it, and I can appreciate that. And that's really necessary. Like there's no room for musical snobbery in music therapy because it's about, connecting with people. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find... This comes from a very different context, but there was a certain time when I did a lot of English teaching, I found really quickly that in order to explain concepts in literature, there were certain universals at certain times. So there was a period of time when you couldn't go wrong by making a Harry Potter reference.
Yep.
And that faded really gradually, but it was replaced quite quickly by you couldn't go wrong with the Hunger Games, or you couldn't go wrong with the 100 or Divergent or some other thing.
Yeah.
How useful do you find it to be really clued into some generalizations about population? Like, do you find that something that you have to think of? If you know, for example, that you're going to be dealing with a whole bunch of, I don't know, say 16-year-olds one day or 65-year-olds another day, is there something in the back of your mind going, okay, I can at least narrow things down?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you've got to have it as a starting point. You need a certain amount of repertoire up your sleeve, but also... because, like I said, music is ridiculously idiosyncratic and I am not a computer. I'm always ready to, flip out of my own repertoire and step into somebody else's and let them teach me. Also, I think, I have to be adaptable musically. So I have to be able to listen to something that they play and then, they might have it on their iPhone or whatever. And then see what I can do with that. If there's no, chord chart, which there might not be, what can we do rhythmically, I guess. But maybe it's more about, songwriting in that point. Yeah. I know what I'm saying. I just trailed off in my own mind.
No.
Things that I could do.
That was perfectly fine. I think two things immediately jump to mind now. Like I have two big questions. One is, has that had an impact on you? Like, has that made you a different or a better musician yourself? Because you are, like, sorry to blow smoke up your ass, like right to your face, but Kate is an amazing and moving singer-songwriter who I still listen to.
What?
No, seriously. And I still have, like, I will still catch myself humming Girls Like a Bit of Sleeves, that's a very deep Kate McMahon cut.
Yeah, that was, like a sociological observation at the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, part of my training is completely music-based, so I've developed heaps of skills. I had to learn the guitar to audition for the course. And I'm still building my guitar skills every day. Percussion, rhythm. Yeah, I think just becoming a bit of an all-rounder is part of the job. So it's pretty nice that I legitimately get to skill up musically because I have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel quite lucky to be able to noodle, and it's like, yeah, I'm working.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely that. And so there's that kind of the technical proficiency aspect, which you just talked about. So this is something that's encouraged you to become even more of a multi-instrumentalist than you already were. Are you still collecting used accordions, by the way? That's another deep cut question I have for you.
No, but I'm collecting just about every other instrument that I can get my hands on. Yeah.
I think it's probably healthier not to specialise, particularly in piano accordions, but...
That's right. I mean, they're heavy for a start.
Yeah.
And... yeah, I mean, they just take up room that other instruments could take up.
Yeah.
But, I've got a whole house, so...
That's true. That's true. You can really branch out now.
Yeah.
So that, as I said, that sort of technical proficiency aspect is one of them. Has the enforced eclecticism is probably a more nasty way to say it than I really mean, but that,
no, I get you.
That perhaps kind of the necessity for that kind of really broad exposure. What's that done to your own writing and your own sensibility about your own stuff? Has it had a broadening impact or not so much?
I don't think so, actually, because I think one of the things that I've learned is that your musical identity is, something that's really important and, unique to everybody. So, I mean, if anything, it's probably reinforced my original tastes and loves, which have changed since then, I have to say. Like now... my favourite genre is psychedelic pop.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's what I really love listening to and writing and exploring in my own time. And I think maybe my training in music therapy has given me, maybe a few more like world music skills and things like that to plug into that. But at the same time, I'm really honouring that musical identity that is mine. So, yeah, if anything, it's probably just made me more insular in my, I'm like, this is my musical identity and I love it. And, I'm going to own that. Yeah.
So then the other thing that I was thinking about earlier is this might be one that you have mixed feelings about. There's the one side of something like, I'm thinking about Spotify, right, as a kind of tool.
Yeah.
And I think on the one hand, like for a music therapist, the ability to call up virtually anything with real rapidity on a mobile device must be the gift of all gifts.
It surely is.
On the one side.
Yeah.
But then there is the notorious way in which it's not financially good for musicians in a number of ways.
Yeah.
On the other side. That must be a complicated place to inhabit.
Yeah, it is. I think ethically as a music therapist, it's important to be aware of, I guess, the royalties aspect. And so, being signed up with the PPCA and all that sort of thing is really important because you don't want to be taking advantage of musicians. I think, within the whole Spotify world... I think musicians, as a musician myself, I think we've kind of adapted to that. So we no longer resent it quite as much as we used to and have realised that it's more about live music as an income source and that's a global change and individuals aren't responsible for that. That's a cultural change. And, as a music therapist and as an individual, I think what I see is that that's meant that musicians are touring more, which means, people have access to artists that maybe they wouldn't have had before. So I really appreciate that aspect of that cultural shift. Yeah, so it is complex, but I think there's so many changes in our world that are due to technology that's one of the, just one of the small things that musicians have to deal with. Yeah. And I guess it's like that broader conversation about there are pros and cons. Being able to share music of your own with people who wouldn't previously have heard it. Yeah. Something that musicians really benefit from. And that connection with musicians that are similar to you. Yeah, so...
And there are some ways to exploit it. I love that story. Have you heard the story of Wolfpack, who created a completely silent album and just asked their fans to stream it constantly
Yeah.
while they were sleeping?
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, if there's a way.
Yeah. That's a one-shot only deal, but you've definitely kudos to them for coming up with that.
Yeah, yeah.
So back to because the reason that I thought of Spotify being such a gift is a couple of years ago, a really, really close friend of mine in terms of my recovery from alcoholism was dying really, really rapidly in hospital. And while he was still at home, his sort of immediate circle of friends in recovery would do things like we organised a record player so he could play his old Bowie LPs.
Yeah.
And that kind of stuff was really remarkable and really good for him, and he got to sort of tap into memories that were really remarkable for him while he was still at home.
Yeah.
But then in a hospital setting, all of a sudden that's really difficult.
Yeah.
But what wasn't difficult was Bluetooth speaker, Spotify, and Dan, what do you feel like listening to right now? And it was just almost all of it was out there, and it was a huge part. Dan was remarkable in so many ways, and he died with such an incredible amount of dignity, which is not easy when you're dying the way that he did. But that was Spotify was an incredibly underrated. His friends got a lot of kudos for the way that they handled his death, but Spotify really deserves a huge amount of credit just for the portable happiness
Absolutely
that it created.
Yeah.
And especially when that palliative care unit was wonderful in its own way, but almost the best they could do was he kind of likes classical music. Okay, so we can put classical FM on really, really quietly in the corner. But that was almost the extent that they could manage.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that Spotify and portable devices, have really helped in making music accessible in those situations. And even I feel like it's kind of brought back the mixtape in a way as well. Playlist development is something that I would often do actually. Particularly if we're talking about, those healthy and unhealthy uses of music. It might be a really good activity with young people to create a playlist of music that you've identified makes you feel in a certain way. And then that can be shared, and then it, that brings back that social aspect again. So I think, Spotify is an incredible tool that, music therapists that I know use a lot in a range of settings,
Yeah. How much do you find either you have the impulse or you actually are within a clinical setting using music in a really directive way to create particular emotional, I guess, responses, I suppose?
Yeah. It depends on the setting, but there's a really interesting concept that we speak about a lot in music therapy called the ISO principle, where it's basically about the use of music to take somebody from one mood state to another. And particularly in my work in dementia wards, for example, there's sort of a period of the day that some of the residents find, they kind of become collectively a bit agitated. And so it's at those times that I might use music really purposefully to meet them in that state and then gradually move towards a calmer and more relaxed emotional state.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you're not thinking I'm going to pipe in Unchained Melody straight away. You're going, we start with the screamo and then
exactly.
we taper it down.
That's right. Well,
that's fascinating.
I guess if you think about it, if you're feeling really agitated and somebody starts, playing some sort of new age spacey music, it's probably just going to irritate you.
Yeah.
And in terms of, if you're thinking about mood, like depression, for example, if somebody plays happy music, sometimes that can just highlight how far away you are from that emotion and make you feel worse.
Yeah.
So if you meet people where they're at, I think in all therapies, psychological therapies, I think all humans just have this real need to be heard, so if you come in and just override what someone's feeling, like, that's not respectful, that's not meeting that need to be heard. So I think first thing is you meet people where they're at, and then, depending on the context, you might work to help them achieve, a state that's more comfortable for them to be in. Because I think, it's not very comfortable to be agitated, and they don't enjoy it. So, helping them to kind of transition.
But that's a remarkable point about sort of like definitely going out of your way to honour the emotional state that exists already.
Yeah.
And then you have a real opportunity.
Yeah.
If you think it's needed or whatever else, to then manipulate's the wrong word, but essentially that to effect change, I suppose.
Yeah.
Neutral way of putting it.
And and I think that's that's the thing. It can be used to manipulate, and so there's a real onus on the music therapist to be always aware of like the autonomy of the individual and really respecting that. And I mean that is sort of my personal view and the training that I've received, but I'm sure that most music therapists would agree that respecting the autonomy of people kind of comes first in a way.
Yeah.
Because, we have rights.
Yeah. And
if we want to be in a certain way, then that's okay. And, you can't really affect change if people aren't ready for it anyway.
Yeah.
So being aware of the power that you do have musically as well, and using that ethically.
Yeah. Has it been your experience that some populations have a more directed sense of what they'd like out of you than others?
I'm not sure. Maybe in aged care, a lot of people want entertainment.
Yeah, right.
Or at least the staff want entertainment for the residents.
Yeah.
But I think in so many cases, not just your average person doesn't know what music therapy is, but also the people that we work with, they don't know what music therapy is. So a lot of it is about kind of showing them what's on offer, and then they might get a sense of what they want. But I don't think people tend to come in with no expectations mostly, because they're like, I don't even know what to do. What do you want me to do? Yeah. And it's like, well, it's not about what I want you to do. It's, I guess, how can we explore what's going on? Or, how can music be used to help with whatever it is that you're needing right now?
How much of a hump is, I know that the art therapist who practices out of my nameless employer has this huge hurdle, which is, but I'm shit at this. Is it hard when you're doing stuff that people need to be actually contributing to? Like if you're starting a kind of, okay, we're going to do a drum circle, or we're going to actually be producing music here, how much of a hurdle is, I can't? Yeah,
it can be. I think the best thing is to just jump in and start and to model it, and to, because it's kind of infectious too, rhythm is innate. Yeah. We talk about that a lot as well with, babies and infants, and even in the womb, rhythm is a huge part of our development, with heartbeat and all of that sort of thing. So, I think people might have that cognitive thought of, I don't know what to do, but then if you start drumming and you're like, come on, and they just will, because they know how. They do know how. So you just don't let them sit in that, I don't know what I'm doing, for too long. And, or maybe you explore more receptive methods with those people as well. It's like, oh, well, you are a really great listener, actually, and you know what you like and what you don't like, so maybe we can explore that.
So you have two hats at the moment. There's your practicing self, and then there's also your research self.
Yeah.
What's your research self? Because we've talked a bunch about your practicing self. Yeah,
well, my research self is just emerging. I said, I've just graduated from a master's of music therapy. So, you know, I'm trying to give my brain a bit of a break right now. However, in a couple of months, I'll be starting work as a research assistant on a project. It's an international music therapy project. So it's being worked on by several universities around the world. And it's working with people with dementia and their carers. And the idea that's being explored is how can these carers be trained to use music therapy with their loved ones. And we're talking about family caregivers.
Yeah.
So, you know, in their own homes, you might have a spouse or a parent or a child. You know, how can carers be empowered to use music therapy principles to support their relationship with their loved ones around the world? Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. And exciting for me because, you know, I think the evidence about music therapy and its helpfulness for supporting people with dementia is huge. There's so much research out there, and, you know, I think there seems to be a greater understanding in popular domains as well about how helpful music therapy can be for dementia in terms of supporting memory and in terms of supporting mood and reducing some of those behavioural and psychological symptoms that, you know, carers understandably can find to be quite distressing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If anything that could shave off like 5% of what someone goes through when they're caring for someone who's in cognitive decline. I mean, I know it just about killed my grandmother, who was a carer for, 10 plus years of someone with really, really profound dementia. And it's a crushing weight that they carry.
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, by kind of getting out there and supporting those carers as well, you know, not only are we supporting the people with dementia, but we're, supporting the carers and empowering them. And it's really sustainable and accessible, which just means that more people can access it. Yeah, so that's the idea.
Yeah, wow.
And that is potentially rolling into some sort of PhD in the next year. But I have to, you know, give my brain a bit more of a rest. But I feel like the more that I work on the project as a research assistant, the more I'll find, you know, what is it? What's the burning question that I have about this that I want to make my own?
Yeah. That is unfortunately relatively crucial for a PhD, as I understand it.
It is, that's right, yeah. My lecturer did try and rope me in to start one this year, and I was like, I need to, that question, it's got to be nailed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
not
gonna have
like
to spend 3 years with that question. I want to be sure.
And it's not like you're doing an arts PhD when you can take wild swerves at your own will at various points during the process.
Yeah, that's right. I know. I think, and to me, research-wise, that's kind of also what's exciting about being in music therapy is that any research that I do can support a very actively growing field and have a tangible effect on the provision of music therapy in the real world.
Yeah.
You know, it can help support new methods or funding or, you know, whatever it is. But it's not just kind of navel gazing.
Yeah. I've found like I'm only doing a grad dip psych, so we're not talking like an enormous deep dive or as deep as it could be.
Yeah.
And that for me was an incredible, and still is, a massive readjustment in terms of like intellectual directions and intellectual values. I've found discomfortingly that I'm a little bit sort of cynical about research and research directions and research methodologies. What's your, like, obviously it's a hugely complicated question, but when you're doing this kind of research, like the kind of research that you're anticipating getting involved in, like what's being measured for you, and how do you feel about the kind of measurements that you're getting back, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it is the ultimate question in research, really. Like, what are you measuring, and is that the right thing to be measuring? You know, do you trust what you've measured? Is that what you really value? And I think I do swerve towards the constructivist point of view. And, you know, within music therapy, I think research can really support the voices of people experiencing music therapy. So I really value that, because I think that's a real opportunity to, I guess, highlight that individual autonomy of those people. You know, they're not subjects. They're the authors. And there's some really interesting projects going on where research projects are being done with, say, young people, where the young people are actually helping to guide the direction of that research, and their voices are being included in the research. And, you know, personally, that is something that I find really captivating, and I think really important in terms of that kind of rights-based approach to research. On the other hand, you know, in terms of getting funding, the quantitative research is essential. You know, that's what will get somebody to fund that next program that allows more people to access music therapy. So I think, you know, a mixed methods approach is the pragmatic approach. But yeah, always really questioning what measures. And I think, you know, for these larger projects that I'm working on, they're just getting as many measures as they can, and they'll work out later, you know, once they've collected data, you know, what is it that's really telling the story? Because I think if you decide too early what's going to tell the story, then you've kind of decided what the story is already. So yeah, I think just being really open to letting the research tell its own story.
So in the kind of music therapy research that exists so far, has it gone into areas like, are we talking, have people done fMRI studies? Do they do skin connectivity? Are they doing, or is it the bulk of it kind of consumer self-report?
I would say, look, there are some that go into that kind of physiological detail and data. A lot more of it is collecting self-report on mood, or like a combination of, you know, changes to medication over a period of time, or self-reported mood over a period of time, or there's a lot of self-report that goes on, because I think, particularly if you're talking about that, you know, psycho-emotional side of things, self-report is what counts.
Exactly.
You know?
How else do you get it?
I mean,
you can look at the yellow patch on an fMRI all you want, but
does the person
what does that
feel you know, better? I'm using quotation marks for that, but you know.
Because it is, I mean, this, in almost everything that we've talked about so far, it really does come down to an attempt to alter the subjective experience. That really is all that counts.
And that even comes down to things like pain, you know. And I mean, you know, you can measure, I guess, some breathing. I don't know, you could measure the volume of breath that's inhaled, you know, if you're talking about supporting people with their breath, because I guess as people decline, that becomes more of an issue. But again, mood plays such a huge role in that, you know, anxiety plays such a huge role in that, that really it's that person's experience of ease of breath that might be the more important thing to be looking at.
And especially if you're talking about anxiety, I mean, the physiological sensations of that are so intense by itself. I mean, whether you're talking about a mood or, you know, the physical sensation of heart rate, it's sort of, it's a very wobbly kind of distinction to make. I mean, you know, sometimes you're working with somebody and, you know, they'll be hooked up to the heart rate monitor and you'll kind of see it drop slowly. But again, like, does that number matter? Not as much as, you know, whether or not the person says they're feeling better. Kate, it has been endlessly fascinating, as I rather anticipated it would be. I feel like I've learnt a ton, which I love. All
I'm
the
just
very best.
impressed that I managed to talk as confidently as I did, you know?
I'll cut that out. We don't. That self-referential, self-deprecating attitude has no place in this podcast. It's going to clash really badly with Dom and I, who just talk with enormous confidence despite any deficits in knowledge that we might have in that particular area. It's not our jam.
All right.
No, but most sincerely, thanks once again. All the best with your own mental health if this does turn into a PhD.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll need that.